Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show, brought to you by DataStax Academy, where we bring you the latest news and interview technical experts to help you succeed at building large-scale distributed systems.
Welcome to a slightly different version of the Distributed Data Show. I'm your guest host, Kathryn Erickson. I've been on the show a couple times as a guest, and I even held the title for most views for like 7 days.
Impressive.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about disruptive innovation. The show is targeted towards anyone that wants to build novel products. We have Matthias as our guest from the CTO office at DataStax. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why this topic excites you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with Jonathan Ellis in the CTO office. So we're looking at innovation at DataStax and the technology stack. Previously, I was a co-founder of Aurelius, working on the Titan graph database. We got acquired by DataStax, so that's how I ended up at DataStax. And before that, I did my PhD at the University of Maryland. So I've always been very interested in innovation, particularly technology innovation. And in recent years, particularly trying to figure out how to make disruptive innovation happen and how to be successful at doing that.
Okay, so what are some examples of disruptive innovations maybe over the last 10 or so years?
I mean, a big one that we're sort of all dealing with is the cloud, obviously. That was a huge disruptive innovation that has changed how we consume compute resources. If you look at particular technologies like distributed databases have definitely disrupted the database landscape quite a bit. And then, looking at blockchain in recent years, or if you look at self-driving cars, things of that nature that are really changing the way that we can interact with the world around us. Those types of technologies that really change the landscape, those I would characterize as disruptive.
Okay, so what do we do? Do we crowdsource some funding and just start building, or is there a process? Where do we start?
Exactly, just start building and hope for the best. No, in all seriousness, when I first started doing innovation, like the way you go about it is you have an idea, you build it, you go out there, you see if it's successful, and you hope for the best. And a lot of startups start that way. There's a good idea, and then it starts growing. And as we all know, most startups fail. So there's that side of the equation where oftentimes you obviously cannot predict the future. So we need to try a lot of things, and some of them will fail. Actually, most of them will fail. Some of them will succeed. But if you follow a process, if you follow certain steps and have a certain type of thinking, you can greatly increase the likelihood of being successful. And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in and trying to learn more about is like, what can you do ahead of time to make it more likely that you will end up with an innovation that actually matters, meaning that actually delivers value to customers.
Okay, so where do we start? Do we start with an idea? Do we start with a problem?
Well, most often as an engineer, you start with I have a great idea, I have a great solution that I want to sell, bring to the market, or work with. But you end up being more successful if you take a step back and look at the problem that you're trying to solve.
Okay.
So for me, the most important understanding or the most important distinction to make was between the problem space and the solution space. Right? Like if you think about innovation, successful innovation is something that solves a particular problem. And it's really helpful to, in your head, distinguish the two. There's the problem, meaning there is a particular person, not an individual, but a particular group of people that have a particular need that is not being currently addressed. And then there's a solution that solves that need in a way that is, business feasible. And keeping those two separate is really, really useful.
So you have an idea and you want to explore the problem. So how do you explore that problem space?
So one of the things that you need to do, and one of the things that I always hated doing, was you actually need to talk to people that have the problem. Right?
That's hard for some of us.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that, you just you have to get out of the building and talk to people and really find out a lot about the problem. Even if you start in the solution space, which for a lot of engineers, myself included, comes more natural, you very quickly jump to, I have a great idea for how I can use artificial intelligence to do this and that. Even when you start there, to go back and be like, okay, what am I actually solving when I do this? And who am I solving this for? And then to identify those people, go seek those people out and talk to them. And really understand very deeply what their problem is.
So we often use the example, the Ford example. Do I need, a faster horse? if they were looking for a faster horse, they wouldn't have invented the car. What's the saying there?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the famous ones where you say basically, if Ford allegedly said, if I had asked people what their problem is, they would have said they needed a faster horse. And the saying is kind of sometimes abused in the context of it's not that useful to talk to people because they're very bad at telling you what they actually need. But I think the saying has a deeper truth to it, which is people are actually very good at identifying problems, right? When you say, I need a faster horse, what you're saying is, I need a faster mode of transportation. So the person has correctly identified the problem, they just misidentified the solution for it.
Okay.
A faster horse, right? It's very hard to make horses faster just by a lot. I mean, you can breed them, but there's a certain limit to how fast a horse can go. But when you take a step back from what the customer actually said, or what the person said in that context, is that they identified a need that needs to be addressed. And that's what you need to look for, is to really drill down into those needs that are being articulated. Even if the way that they articulate them, as in this particular famous example, is a solution-oriented one. You really want to take a step back and go back to the problem. What is the problem that they have and how can you solve it?
So how does finding that problem space and iterating that problem space, what does that do for you in the solution space?
It really helps you understand whether your solution solves not just a problem, but an important enough problem. So one of the things that we realized early on when you do, for instance, in the space of databases that I am in, like there are just so many things that you could do, right? There's so many great ideas for technology, so many cool novel innovations that you can engage with. One of the challenges is to understand which of those matter enough that people would actually be willing to pay money for it or actually engage with you in the first place, right? So one of the things that going back to the problem space does for you, you can zoom out a little bit and understand what the context is in which that problem occurs and understand what are other problems around that, and is this problem actually important enough for our customers that they are seeking out a solution for it. One of the challenges, so one of the early things was when, for me in the graph database field, is you go back to a customer and you say, hey, here's this novel graph index that I want to build and does this and that. Isn't this cool? And when you go to a customer with this kind of approach, they will say, yeah, that's really cool. And then you go back and say, wow, my idea was validated. But what you're missing is you haven't really asked how this really addresses the wide array of problems that they might have and whether this actually ranks anywhere in their top 5.
Okay, so you have an idea. You take that idea and you really explore the problem space around the idea. So it sounds like you're kind of narrowing the scope. Okay, so we've narrowed the scope. We're back into the solution space. Where do we go next?
Right. So you identified a problem, which typically means you know a particular group of people, right? Or you have a persona that you use to identify a group of people that have a particular need, and now you're trying to figure out how can I solve for the need. So there's a bit of an iteration that goes on. Typically, as you explore the solution space, you get more insight on what the problem is because you can take certain ideas and you can iterate on them, show them to people, or talk to them about particular solutions, and that typically helps people articulate the problem better. So you go through that cycle. But once you feel like you have really zoomed in on a particular problem that you feel is worthwhile, then the next thing you want to do is you want to establish product market fit.
Okay, so where do we start with product market fit? I feel like we have the product idea, so we look at the market fit. Where do we go?
Right, so the first thing you want to do is you want to look at the market, right? You want to make sure that the market is a feasible market, which basically what that says is that the market is one where you expect to make enough money, or where you expect that building the particular product that you're interested in is justified by the size of the market and by how much people would be willing to pay for it. So one of the things that you start with typically is with what's called the total addressable market, or TAM for short. So you try to find an estimate for how big is this market overall? How big is the total addressable market? Okay,
so let's talk about that maybe with a concrete example. We're in the database market. Maybe we use Cassandra. Okay, right. So I want to build a distributed database, and so my market is...
Right, so you'd start with the total addressable market would be the entire, so in our case, Cassandra being an operational database, you would say my total addressable market is the operational database market, right? So that's the market in which you would position yourself. And then you can go to, in this particular instance, Gartner or some other analysts would be able to tell you what the total size of the operational database market is, and I don't actually know the exact figure, but I think it's somewhere 35, 40 billion, something like that. Yeah. And then they tell you how much it grows year over year. So that gives you sort of a rough, this is how big the market is. But it's important to like take that as a starting point only. Like a lot of people like stop there and be like, oh wow, we have this big market opportunity, now let's go innovate. The next thing is total addressable market actually breaks down into service addressable market and then share of market. So the next thing you want to figure out is within that large market, how much of that are you actually targeting? Right? Because we're not actually, with Cassandra or distributed database in general, we're not actually targeting the entire operational database market. We're looking at those that need a distributed database, right? So that's the service addressable market. So the part of the market that is addressable by the product that you're building.
Okay, so there was a third definition there as well, right?
Right, and the third one is the share of market. So once you're in your market, you try to identify how much of that service addressable market can we reasonably capture.
Okay.
Right? Because you always have competitors, and even if that competitor is just not using you in the first place, like even for somebody who has that need but might not choose to use you, so you want to figure out how much of that market can I actually reasonably capture. So how much can I get people on board through marketing? How much of that share is going to go to my competitors? So you want to figure out those numbers so you can get an actual, somewhat accurate estimate of what is your entire opportunity for your particular innovation.
Okay, so you go through this exercise and you have this idea that you believe in, and from the beginning, from your exploration of the problem space, you have a solution that you know solves the problem. Are there times where you work through the second step, this market fit step, and you say, well, I have a solution and I don't have somebody that wants to use it?
Yeah, so there's the part of the product market fit where you want to make sure that you are actually, and this is where the fit comes in. So once you know that you have the market, the fit part is, do I actually have a product that satisfies that market, right? In a way that really is meaningful to your customer. Right, and that takes on different shapes. Like one of it is obviously that you want to build a product that is actually doing the thing that needs to be done in order to solve the problem, right? Like, so in the case of a distributed database, it's pretty obvious you want the database to be able to distribute and scale out and be highly available. Like, does your product actually do that? But there are other elements that you need to take into consideration, which are things like, can you actually message that? So can you actually reach your target audience with that kind of message? Like sometimes, and this is particularly true in the technology space, like some of the solutions that we're building are very highly complex. And so it is non-trivial to communicate to a particular target customer what you're building and what the value is, right? So can you actually communicate this succinctly? And does this resonate with your target audience? That's another thing you want to test fairly early on before you go down the rabbit hole of like building out everything and building this wonderful technology, and then you step back and you're like, actually we have no idea how we can communicate this in a way that actually resonates with our target audience.
So in that case, you have a product that solves the problem, you have an addressable market, and you don't have the value proposition for the customer.
Right, exactly, and that would be a real shame, right? Because at that point you have invested so much time.
But you're close at that point. You've got to go back.
You're so close. Yeah, and that's where a lot of these things that we're just talking about, like you really should think of them as more iterative things because you're constantly learning as you do these things, right? So we're kind of talking about them as sort of a step-by-step kind of guide, but a lot of these things, like initially you would do a sort of a rough TAM, SAM, and SOM estimate. You would then look at, can we actually capture that market? Do we have the right messaging? And then you would start incrementally building out some of those things, right? So you would start, for instance, building a landing page, right? And try to figure out if the message that you have resonates with your customers.
Okay.
Right? That's a very easy way to do.
So my next question was going to be, when can we start writing code, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Our viewers, our developers.
When do I write the code?
They've worked through product market fit. We think we have a good understanding of the market. Now it's time to start writing code. Do we just move forward from here? Do we iterate back through? What's the process?
Right. So the most important thing I think is that to think of product market fit is never a binary thing. It's not like a switch that kind of flips at some point where you're like, yeah, we don't have product market fit, we don't, and then suddenly boom, we have product market fit. Oftentimes it is portrayed that way because you have that sort of hockey stick growth curve that happens when you establish true product market fit. But that really glances over the fact that there were so many iterations before where you could see that you were getting closer and closer to product market fit. And that's really, that is the critical element. To think of it from like okay, initially we might just be doing mock-ups, right? You just draw something on a napkin to show it to a bunch of people. You have conversations, right? And you get closer to product market fit that way. Later in the stage, you're doing prototypes, right? You're writing up web apps or simple examples of what you're trying to build. Not fully functional, but just functional enough so people can get the idea of what you're trying to do. and you start coding a little bit. But I guess the most important thing that I had to learn was to think of everything that you do as a hypothesis. Right? Everything that you want to do when it comes to product market fit, whether it's on the market side, whether it's on the product side or the persona side, all these things are really things that you cannot fully know, right? You're trying to make those are essentially guesses. Because if it was fully known, somebody else probably would have done it. Like it's not really a disruptive innovation if everything is knowable in advance, right?
Okay.
Like somebody else would have done this already. So everything that you're doing is likely some kind of guess, some kind of a hypothesis. You believe that this value is being delivered, or you believe that this particular technology choice can accomplish a certain thing. And so what you want to do is you basically want to write up a little booklet where you write down all the most important hypotheses that you have. And then the ones that are most critical, you try to figure out what can I do today so that I can de-risk that hypothesis.
Okay.
Right? So if there's something that is really critical to your success, what can I do to make it less likely that this particular thing is false? Right? What can I learn today? Who can I talk to? What can I build to reduce that probability?
Okay. So a lot of our viewers are open source contributors. So how does this relate from us at a startup to those wanting to contribute to new open source projects, to maybe open source something on their own? How does it relate back to that set of viewers?
Yeah, I think open source is a great way to innovate, in particular in a sort of collaborative environment. I would say that if you're interested in particular in extending an open source or starting a new open source project, it's important to go through some of those steps in order to make sure that what you're open sourcing actually matters, if that's important to you. I mean, sometimes open source is more sort of a byproduct of something that you're already doing, and then you open source a component of it. If you believe open source as a means of like doing something disruptive and novel, you can look on the community and figure out like what do people actually need. Like a great way to start is with mailing lists. Like what are the things that people most often complain about? That's a great way to find out what user needs are, right? And then build a simple prototype, put it out there. It's super easy to do that. Like just do a pull request and be like, hey, here I had some idea for how to solve this particular problem, and then get feedback on it very early on. And I feel like open source communities are particularly great for that because people are generally very interested in providing feedback and giving you guidance. And so that is, from me particularly, that was the biggest thing I had to learn is that you would, as an engineer, you're typically the one where you're like, okay, I understand the problem. Now I'm going to like hide in a closet for a year. I'm going to just hack this out. I'm going to make this absolutely perfect, like just super, super perfect, and then I'm going to open source it.
Right.
Right? And instead to go back to like, well, I don't really know if that's actually really needed yet. I think there is a value there, but I cannot be 100% sure. So I try to identify what is the component that I'm least sure about, and then build something where I can test that and put that out there in the community or put it out there in some forum, open source or other, and try to get feedback on that particular component as early as possible.
I think that makes sense. And so we've talked through idea to development and iterating back through and continuing to test the hypotheses. Where do we go from here? How do we take this to the next level after this podcast when we're ready to work through one of these ideas on our own?
Yeah, I would say think of hypothesis validation and iteration as a constant. And there's so many things, like it feeds directly into the whole ideas behind Agile and Agile development, right? We tend to get lost in the process of it and the various incarnations, whether it's extreme programming or Kanban or whatever flavor. Really think of these things as a means to be able to help you de-risk your hypotheses and really make it a mindset. I think it's super helpful, particularly if you're interested in innovative work, in work that is supposed to move the needle, to constantly think and question what is the next thing that I can learn in order to help me understand the problem better, in order to come up with better solutions. Right? So really make that a constant mindset. Even as you build the product, even when the product's already out on the market, even when you have already established product market fit, and you're a huge company, like to just keep iterating, keep doing this, keep using this process to come up with the next thing, and keep going, keep learning.
Yeah. So I think this has been a bit of a different show, but I think this is incredibly interesting. I think we're always excited to see what's next, what the next disruptive technology is, what our users are building with our product, and what's next. So any final words to the builders out there that might be where you are or were, in a PhD program thinking maybe this graph database thing will catch on?
Yeah, I mean, first, just sort of a shameless plug is that, this is what we're doing in the CTO's office at DataStax. So if this is something that you're interested in, if you're interested in innovation, that's a good place to come to. So apply at DataStax. If you're working for another company, if you're doing your own thing, just keep learning, keep iterating, and you'll eventually get there. It can be a very long road, but it is definitely the road that gets you to the success the quickest.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to put this video on repeat so I get my title back, and have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us again for the Distributed Data Show. We love your feedback, so go to the Distributed Data Show page on DataStax Academy and tell us what you think. You can also find us on the DataStax Academy YouTube channel, or find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get great podcasts. While you're there, make sure and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.